Everything was normal in one old alpha world. Until it happened. And so, it was a nice sunny day, and Steve was just minding his own business, tending to a small farm of carrots, when all of a sudden, the sun turned blood red, and a gust of wind blew him into the air. He landed with a resounding thud. Steve was confused. What just happened? And so fearful of the unknown, Steve equipped his armor and drew his sword, prepared to fight whoever or whatever caused this. But as he ventured back to his farm, a burning red glow enveloped the area. It was originating from his farm, and as he got closer to it, the light began to glow brighter and brighter. Steve contemplated leaving, but no, he couldn't do that now, as he was intrigued, and he needed to know what was causing this. And so despite the lurking danger, he took a few more steps towards the glow. However, just as he gained sight of his home, the glow intensified, as before him stood the source of it all, a demonic red portal. As soon as he saw it, he was hypnotized, and so he was drawn closer and closer and closer, following the orders of this hypnotic portal, until he was standing before it. Just before he was about to enter, he regained partial control from the hypnotic aura, and yet, in that moment, he foolishly decided to venture within, as his curiosity was piqued, and he just needed to know what was beyond that portal, and so he entered it. He had never been to a place like this before, which, at this point, was rather shocking to Steve, as he had travelled all over the world, and he believed that he had seen everything. But here he was, in this new land, that, for some reason, felt oddly nostalgic. He had never been here. Why was he feeling that way? So he turned his head around, trying to figure out what this was. Wait a second, you recognized it now. This was an alpha world, as these were the worlds that the ancient players used to roam, long, long ago. He remembered hearing about them, and he had seen many screenshots of them. He just didn't think they were real. Yes, this was definitely it. This was an alpha world. There was no doubt about it. But, wait. Alpha worlds don't exist anymore. He shouldn't be here. And so, Steve turned around so that he could find that portal and return home, fearing that this world was unstable, and that he would be doomed if he stayed here, as after all, alpha worlds are too old to still be stable. Now luckily, he saw his way out of here, as the portal was behind just a couple of trees, but it was fading away. He was running out of time, and so without thinking, he ran after it. But before he could reach it, the portal faded into nothingness. He was trapped here. There was no way out of this. Alpha worlds were in a separate universe, and well, Steve didn't exactly know how to travel universes all that well, so he was just going to have to stay here till hopefully that portal came back. Because it should come back eventually, probably quite soon, he imagined. So really, this probably wasn't that bad, as after all, Steve had sometimes wondered what life would be like for those ancient players that wandered these sorts of lands. And so, while he waited for the portal to return, he decided to set himself a little goal. That being to build a life akin to that of the old alpha players. And so with nothing else to do, he set to work, chopping down trees, diving into oceans to collect clay, melting said clay down into bricks, pressing that subscribe button, mining cobblestone, chopping down even more trees, and then building his little compound, where he had a small brick house by the sea, a little port, and even a small cooking site over to the side, along with an abundant wheat farm surrounding it all. Now, this took him several weeks to achieve, but it was a fairly simple life once the base had been built, as Steve, with his compound secure, would spend his days while waiting for his portal to return, farming wheat, planting seeds, baking bread, expanding his house, and going on these little adventures across the vast oceans. Now, he never strayed too far from his base, for fear of the deadly zombies and sneaky skeletons that wandered the land. And sometimes, those evil mobs would act in ways that Steve had never seen before. And so it was best to just avoid them, as they were an unpredictable threat. But other than those undead mobs, which acted really oddly, everything else was mostly normal. Well, actually, no, not quite. So on occasion, everything turned red, and code began to leak from the sky. The world was corrupting. But that didn't happen that often, and when it did happen, it only lasted for a few seconds. Also, this was a very old version, so Steve foolishly didn't really think about it all that much. It was probably fine. Alphaworld probably did this. Also, none of these odd occurrences should matter all that much, as he was going to be back home very soon. Right? He was going to be back home, wasn't he? The portal was going to return. He wasn't trapped here forever, was he? After almost a decade of the same boring routine, and with no signs of anything changing, most hope of ever returning to his home drained within Steve's soul. This was it. This was going to be his life, from now until death. He was never going to leave this compound. He was just going to spend his days in a cycle of nothingness. Nothing had any meaning to it anymore. His existence was painful. But no, he couldn't allow himself to be defeated. He was Steve, the greatest warrior ever known to the overworld. And so, he made the decision to change for the better. It was his responsibility, and only his responsibility, to ensure that he thrived here. And so with a new burning intensity within his soul, Steve had a plan for what to do next, so that he could become the greatest player that this world had ever seen. His plan being to construct a full set of diamond armor. And so, with his head held high, he ventured into the great cave networks of the underground Alpha world, ready to find those magnificent diamonds. Now, it was very dark in those caves, and his torches were ineffective at fighting the shadows. But still, the brave adventurer pressed deeper into those mines, determined to find those diamonds. No matter how unsettling or fearful he might feel, he had to do this. But little did he know, he wasn't alone. He never was. So, anyways, after a short few hours, Steve was able to find all the diamonds that he needed. However, as he was leaving, a strange compulsion took over him. He didn't like these diamonds anymore. They were evil and dirty and just wrong. And so he threw all of them into lava, and he turned his back on them before he returned to the surface, where he then continued with his old, boring, daily routine for the next few decades. Nothing interesting happened in that time. He just did the same things over and over and over. His life was dull. If only he pressed that subscribe button, maybe then things would have gotten better. But he never did that. So everything was just meaningless and boring and repetitive. Well, that was until one fateful night, as when the full moon reached the peak of the sky, the moon mysteriously turned blood red, and a vision began to display all across the sky. Steve looked up, intrigued with what he was seeing. This was something new. But what he saw would horrify him. This vision was of his own world. It had been so long, he had almost forgotten about it. But that was it. That was the overworld. It was back at last. But something was different. Everything was on fire, and red, and corrupted, and evil, and demonic. The vision ended. Anxiety rushed through him. Something wasn't right. He could feel it within his soul. His world was suffering, and it had something to do with this alpha world that he was residing in. But then, as he turned his head away from that vision, he saw it. A giant brick pyramid. And on the apex of this pyramid was a glowing red crystal. It was calling out to him. Rather quickly, he gave into the allure of this crystal. He had to go see it. And thus, he allowed its malevolent call to take control of his movements. Step by step, he ascended the pyramid, getting closer to that irresistible crystal. The evil essence of that crystal was taking a hold of his soul. This world was succumbing to the pressure. It was all going to be over very soon. But then, as Steve stood facing the crystal, he regained consciousness. Wait, what was he doing? He had been acting so strangely when in this world. He wasn't in control of himself, and it was all because of something in this world trying to control him and stop him. Probably that evil crystal. After all, this demonic relic seemed corrupted and evil. But now, when he finally realized that, it was too late. He should have seen the signs all along, but no, he hadn't. And now there was nothing that he could do to destroy that crystal. He just didn't have any of the resources required to do such a task. The evil had won. The crystal's malevolent presence had already begun to spread out of this world and into all worlds that existed within this universe and all universes, making everything dark and corrupted. There was no stopping it now. It was reaching a point of no return, and so Steve closed his eyes and braced for it. He was going to be dead any second now, and the universe was going to be over. But after a few minutes, he wasn't dying, and now we could hear all these strange sounds. Steve opened his eyes, and well, he was shocked with what he saw. He was standing on air, and more noticeably, he was no longer in that lost alpha world, as he was back in the overworld, at last. Well, sort of. This felt like the overworld, but it was very different. The air was warmer, and everything looked green. Steve looked around, and it was then that he realized where everything seemed a little off. Yes, he was back in the overworld, just millions of years ago, as dinosaurs were currently roaming the world. Well, this can't be good, but still, there was hope for the universe, as in front of him was a command block and lever. He took a step closer to it, fully aware that command blocks had effectively infinite power, so perhaps this was a divine intervention that he was experiencing that could save everything. And as he looked down at the command block, he saw a version of the future. It was himself pulling that lever, and from that, a command was issued that set that old, corrupted, lost alpha world into the darkest depths of existence. It was deleted. That must be it. If he activates the command block, the corruption is killed, as the evil alpha world is deleted. He didn't need to see anymore. This was it. This was going to save the universe. And so he flicked the lever without any further hesitation. And the alpha world was gone. The universe was saved. But just after that, Steve was teleported through time and space. He wasn't expecting that, as he was then returned to his small farm, and his memory of that entire event was wiped. But wait, the command wasn't over just yet. as just a few seconds later, the command block froze and shattered, and then began the Great Ice Age. This Ice Age would be devastating for the ancient world, and most of the world's population would die out because of it. Yet, from its depths, a new threat would emerge. And so, to learn what happened next, you'll need to watch this video.